G'day everyone, just a few quick insights into your episode today. Today's episode guest is Matt Forman from XPON Technologies. Matt has taken this incredible business around marketing technology and actually extended reality. I'll talk a bit about that in the episode, but fundamentally kind of marketing and customer experience technology platform. And he's taken it in 2 years from zero to listing. So it's now on the ASX. It's been an incredible story of growth. They've got 120 people now around the world working for them. So if you might think, it's a tech entrepreneur and I'm not in a tech business. So what am I going to learn? This episode is far less about technology and a lot more around building culture, building team, all of the softer elements that actually have been able to help them differentiate and attract great talent. And that is relevant for every single business owner. So you're going to learn, you're going to get some great insights as to what it's like to be a public company CEO from Matt, but also some really granular insights to how they've thought about building culture, leadership, and creating the right environment in which people can succeed around the world working for their business. So I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of it. Listen all the way through. You're going to love there's gold all the way through this episode. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day everyone, and welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where we help first-time founders learn the secrets of scaling so they can fulfill the potential of their businesses, make bigger decisions with greater confidence, and maximize the impact they can create in the world. I am your host, Sean Steele, and I have a very special guest today for you, Matt Forman, founder and CEO of XPON Technologies Group. How are you today, Matt?
G'day, Sean. Fantastic. Thanks. How are you?
All right, I'm very good. Good to see you again. Now, look,
too.
for those, I might just give a quick few insights into sort of your background and the XPON business, but please make sure you correct me if I'm wrong. So you founded, you and I have met a few times. We've known each other for a while back, actually, from the sort of world of advisory. You founded and led 5 different digital startups, including lots of capital raising, and you work with PE and private equity, and you do a whole bunch of mentoring, I know, at River City Labs and the Innovation Centre up on the sort of technology incubators up in Queensland on the Sunshine Coast, where we both happen to live. And you founded XPON back in, I think it was late 2019. So I guess that was just pre-COVID, right? It's an interesting timing trying to build a business.
Interesting times, yes.
And then you went public 2 years later, end of 21. And XPON, I guess as a business, is underpinned by 2 kind of key platforms. Wondrous, which is where a client centralizes all their marketing and customer data to help them, I guess, deliver a more personalized experience for customers. And then you've got Holoscribe, which is an extended reality experience sort of platform. So people who don't have specialized skills can therefore publish extended reality and 360 type content across any channel. And you've got customers in Australia and New Zealand, UK and Europe. You've gone global pretty fast, and you've got a team. How big would your team be now? Sort of 75 to
I think it's about 120 now.
120, crikey, that's moving fast.
Yeah,
and your core development teams in Vietnam.
Yep.
Which is awesome. I feel like I don't know, everyone who's got their sort of development teams offshore, Vietnam seems like, I don't know whether you were a first mover, like, was no one else going to playing in Vietnam when you got there? Because no one else says to me that that's where their core development team, but you. That was an interesting choice. Did you feel like you were early there?
Yeah, well, we actually did an acquisition, the Holoscribe platform that we have. We acquired that back in April of 2019. So right when COVID started to really bite, or was it 2020? 2020, April 2020, I should say. And they had a small engineering team in Hanoi in Vietnam as part of that business. So that was the genesis of that. Ben Fogarty and Marcus Callan, who the founders of Holoscribe, they'd had a team up there for probably about 4 or 5 years. So we sort of just built on that presence that we acquired through that acquisition. It's been fantastic. The talent there's amazing. The culture's great. And there is not that many Western companies up there. Probably shouldn't let all the secrets out. But it's
not been. We were talking about Nicaragua, actually. That's development team. You should go to Nicaragua. That's where it's at.
That's right.
So look, and I know I've probably completely undersold the platform's capability. You don't go public in 2 years without some technology that's got some real potential impact. Can you unpack a bit about what the sort of platform helps people do? Like who's the sort of perfect client? What are the typical use cases? And particularly also in the extended reality space, just sort of maybe give us a bit of a description of, extended versus, virtual versus augmented, like help people understand what
Yeah.
that actually means.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll just give you a bit of background around the problem space that we operate in,
Great.
and that'll set the context for the actual platform. So the core sort of root cause of the problem we solve for is actually a privacy problem.
All right.
And if you're familiar with digital marketing and the internet, you may have seen all this stuff around about third-party cookies, and third-party cookies are going away. All of the major vendors like Apple, Microsoft, Google have all either remove them, well, everyone has except Google. Actually, Google's removing them next year. So
Right.
that sounds like just a technical thing, but it's actually a
That's
fundamental
big.
change in how the
Yeah.
internet works. I reckon it's probably the biggest fundamental shift to the internet since probably the 90s, to be honest. So,
Wow.
because those cookies, they're really simple technology. They're just a little text file that sits on your computer, and your browser controls them, and it allows websites and internet companies to track what you do on the internet. So, with this increased sort of awareness from consumers around privacy, and
Mm.
I guess an increasing level of distrust around how their information is being used online. And then you see that match with the regulators all over the world. Europe's led that with GDPR.
Yeah.
Australia's got their own privacy principles, the California Privacy Act. There's lots of legislation happening all
Mm.
over the world around this. So that was really the catalyst for these internet companies to start to make this shift away from this tracking technology. And just to give you a really basic example of what it's enabled, if you've ever been on Facebook and seen an ad for a pair of shoes and clicked on that ad, and then those pair of shoes follow you around the internet for the next 6 weeks, whether or not you bought them or not, that's sort of the third-party cookies has enabled that to happen.
Yeah.
And with that going away, it's had a massive impact on the business models of these big internet companies. I think Facebook said in their recent earning call, it's cost them $10 billion in revenue just from Apple making these changes.
Wow. Yeah.
Google's making these changes in 2023. They haven't given it a specific date yet. But Google Chrome's the number one web browser in the world. So, once Google removes that functionality, the impact's going to be immense. So it's going to cost these internet companies tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. But also it's a issue for advertisers. So whether
big
you're
issue
big or
for the
small
advertiser. Yeah.
advertiser,
No retargeting.
that's right. No retargeting on the internet, and a real reduced ability to actually get really granular with your targeting as well, because a lot of that data that Facebook was tracking and packaging up and selling to advertisers doesn't exist anymore. So
Wow.
that's sort of the root cause of how we've approached the problem that we solve. And our Wondrous customer data platform, what it does is it enables organizations to use what's called first-party data. So that's data that a company owns about its customers and consumers. And that can be generated from lots and lots of different sources of information. It might be from their CRM, it could be from their e-commerce store, it could be from their point of sale, if they're a retailer, loyalty. There's lots of different sources of this data. So this is data that a company owns, and it's probably the biggest latent asset that we see in any organization. It's really underutilized data. So typically we'll see clients of ours, they'll have sort of 6 to 8 primary sources of this first party data, but they can have up to 200 sources, and it's all siloed throughout the organization. It's not connected.
Yeah.
What I see about you, Sean, in one system might be different to what I see about you in another system. So our Wondrous platform enables companies to bring all that data together and centralize it in one place in the cloud. And then it runs this process called enrichment, which is essentially stitching together all those different versions of you from those different systems to create a single view of the customer, or a single view of you as a consumer. And once that's in place, that enables the machine learning, the AI, to do what it does best, which is crunch these massive amounts of data and predict behavior. So it might be things like you might have a propensity to purchase a certain product. You might be exhibiting behavior that might lead to you have a high propensity to churn, for example. So there's all these predicted insights that the system can generate once all that data's in place.
Right.
So
So
with that,
as an example of that, I've purchased something, and I keep going back to the cancellation page or something on the website, and it's going, hey, this guy keeps coming to the cancellation page. Like he's probably there's a risk indicator going on there. Maybe this guy's likely to churn. That kind of, that's sort of a really basic example.
absolutely, yeah. To give you a working example, like we work with one of the biggest superannuation funds in the country. So one of the things they're really keen on understanding is member churn. So members that want to churn their money out of their super fund to another fund. So there's a whole heap of like data signals that can sort of predict that might be happening. It could be the sort of content and the pages they're going to on the website to research how to, move your super money around. It could be their contributions have stopped. There's lots of different data signals that you can bring into this. And then the machine learning is okay, well, this, for example, in the super example, this member might have a high propensity to churn. So before they churn, you might want to do some really targeted communications to that member to prevent them from churning, for example. So, that's a use case that, people would use their platform for. So once all that data is in place, and this is where we come full circle back to the Facebooks and the Googles of the world that are losing a lot of money from this, is the data that our system has can be synchronized up in a really privacy compliant and anonymized way back into Facebook and Google and LinkedIn and all these internet advertising platforms. And that enables the company to run very targeted advertising against those groups of customers. We call them audiences, so those audiences. Or they can use that to push back into content channels. So they might want to run, tailored, personalized sort of messaging through content on their website or email or whatever the different content channels are as well. Mm-hmm. So that's the core sort of, simplified version of what Wondrous does. Obviously, there's a lot of technical stuff that sits under the hood. And then where the Holoscribe platform comes in, that's a sort of bet we've made on the future. We acquired that business back in 2020, in March 2020, just as the first COVID lockdowns actually happened. So that was a very interesting time to acquire a business. That team was based up in London, and then they had that engineering team in Hanoi in Vietnam. So unfortunately, I never got to go to London when we acquired the business because we were locked down in COVID. I finally got there a couple of weeks ago. 2 years in the making, that trip.
Wow.
But sort of my view on this and our view as XPON as well is, Mark Zuckerberg sort of termed this coin the metaverse and sort of made it popular, 6 months ago or whatever. But our view was that is definitely going to be the next way that consumers interact with brands through digital channels, is in a much more rich and immersive way. So if we have a platform that enables brands to build content and publish experiences in a really simple way, and then can power that with all of that data that I just spoke through, that personalized data, we feel we've got a really compelling solution for customers where we can help them with their data and help them optimize their data. And then we can help them with their experiences and optimize those experiences and content as well, and really powering it with machine learning and AI. So, that's still fairly nascent. Like, there's still a lot of hype around the metaverse and that whole area as well. What we sort of see is customers are using it as kind of as a bridge to the metaverse. And what I mean by that is it's about learning. So it's about testing stuff, getting data, seeing how customers interact in these different environments and these immersive environments, and then really using the learning to inform their strategy as the metaverse sort of becomes more and more mainstream, which I think the barrier to that is the hardware. You mentioned a few things around augmented and extended and virtual and all these different realities. I think our view is it'll be a blended reality. And when the hardware looks like these reading glasses that I'm wearing on my head, and you don't look like you're in Star Trek like some of those original versions of the glasses did.
The current elements,
it'll be much more mainstream. And that's where I think the power of that sort of technology, where you can put a digital overlay over the physical world, or you can actually immerse yourself in a fully virtual world and then link that back to a physical experience in some way. And that might be a shopping experience in a store, for example. You can try on clothes and with your VR headset on. And then if you actually want to go into the store and try them on in real life and buy those through a physical channel, that blended experience and that blended commerce is certainly where we think things will sort of migrate to in the next sort of 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. For those who haven't spent any time kind of looking at the metaverse or considering it yet, you will have, if you want to go back, you can listen to a podcast I just did with Barry O'Reilly from the Unlearn podcast. And we have a much deeper conversation about the metaverse and NFTs and blockchain and the whole sort of Web3 space. So worth going and having a listen to. But if you think, I, like you, am a big believer that this is a material shift that's coming. And particularly, I'm always, I'm typically bringing an education lens to it because I spend so much time in that industry. But that's absolutely where I see the future of blended education experiences, because it perfectly brings together the social cohesion and the social learning experiences that people are looking for, the interactivity that comes with it, but also then the ability to have, asynchronous offline, study when you want, learn the boring stuff by video that we're already doing today. But actually, what's often missing at the moment where we're doing virtual, sort of instructor-led learning, it's still very, it's instructor to students, students back to instructor. It's very difficult to get a quality conversation that feels like a conversation between students, even if you break them off into a Zoom room. It's not the same. You're missing all of those side conversations, the ability to sort of choose who you interact with, all of those small cues, but that actually really matter in a social experience. So it's really interesting that you guys are taking an early bet on that, and that's really exciting. And what
Yeah.
will the new partnership you've done with Google a month ago mean for your customers?
Yeah, so we announced, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, what's called a CMU partnership, which stands for Customer Match Upload. And like I sort of spoke through around those use cases of taking that first party data in a really, privacy compliant way, enabling that to synchronize into the platforms. That's what that partnership with Google does. There's a very short list of vendors globally that have sort of met the stringent security criteria. And what that means is if you're a Google Ads customer, so you buy Google AdWords for search, or you're buying ads on YouTube or whatever the Google ad products are, our platform natively integrates into that now. So you can go into actual Google Ads interface, and you can select Wondrous as your integration source. And then if you've got data in our Wondrous platform, you can sync that into Google for your retargeting and your exclusion lists and all the different advertising use cases. So we're really excited about that. It's only quite new. And so there's a lot of work we're doing now, starting to build the awareness around that and working really closely with Google around how we start to scale that up. Because it does two things. It helps your ads become more effective. And the other thing it does is it provides data signals to the Google platform so their machine learning can learn faster. Because in this modern digital marketing world, there's just too many variables. And for a human to be able to guess and optimize all those variables, it's just too hard. So enabling the machines to do all that heavy lifting and predict which customers and how much you should pay for the ads and those kind of things, that's the most efficient way of doing it. And so that partnership that we've done provides signals to the algorithms, so the algorithms can learn faster and they can actually predict and deliver outcomes better for advertisers as well. So it's a great win-win for Google, us, and the advertisers.
Love it. Love it. We've talked about the genesis of the business in 2019. Why did you decide to go public? And did you set out with that intention from the get-go?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think maybe to wind back a little bit, 2008, I'd established a digital marketing agency. That was an agency called Trafficker, probably one of the biggest independent agencies in the country back in the day. So we helped a lot of customers with their Google ads, their Facebook ads, those kind of things. They're a very, very hard business to scale. They're low margin. It's just very competitive. And in 2014, we set up an analytics practice inside that agency, really to help our customers use all this data that was being generated through their advertising and all those customer databases that I mentioned before as well. And they have very different dynamics. It was very sticky. It was high margin. It was recurring revenue. And so fast forward to 2018, we made the decision to spin out that analytics practice out of the agency and then go about winding down the digital marketing agency. And that was the genesis of XPON. So 2018, we did that. 2019, we incorporated XPON. And then we did that acquisition over in the UK for Holoscribe in 2020. And that was really bringing together the moving parts that we had to then enable us to build the business that we've got today. I guess I've always worked for myself for most of my career. I've done little stints working for other companies, but always liked the autonomy of being an entrepreneur and making my own choices and answering to myself. Although we all have a boss, and my wife might think otherwise. But the autonomy is really important to me as an entrepreneur. And so we looked at all these different options. We looked at venture capital, private equity, and we decided probably the best route was for us to actually do an early stage IPO. I think when we made that decision, obviously the dynamics in the market were very different to what they are today, even in the last few months. Mm-hmm. So that was really the reason why we said, well, we'll do an early stage IPO rather than a raise PE or venture capital, just to allow us to have more autonomy. Mm-hmm. That's worked really well for us, and that was the right strategy for us because we've brought businesses together into XPON as well, and the founders are still involved. Having that real founder-led entrepreneurial kind of spirit's super important. Between us as a sort of senior exec founding team, I think we own 53% of the company still. So between us, we're still the majority shareholders.
Yeah.
So we still do very much have the ability to make the choices that we need to make, obviously within the constraints of being a public company.
Yeah.
So we raised about 5.5 million in, I guess you'd call it seed pre-IPO money.
Mm-hmm.
That was done primarily through high net worth, so sophisticated investors.
Mm-hmm.
And then just before the IPO, so we IPO'd in December 2021, and we did a pre-IPO raise sort of July, August that year. And that sort of brought the first two institutional investors into our share registry. So there was a investment fund called Micro Equities. They invested, and another fund called Altor Capital, and they invested in that pre-IPO. So that was 5.5 million all up. And then when we listed in December, we raised another 12.5 million through the IPO.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
timing wise, fantastic. We got it away before everyone thought tech stocks were the Antichrist. So that's good. We've got plenty of capital in the bank, so we can go and execute on our strategy, and we don't have to be short term in our thinking, which is really, really good.
That's great.
And yeah, we're growing the business super fast at the moment, and we're very lucky because the underlying unit economics of the business, so they're the economics of what a customer costs to acquire, or what they call the CAC, customer acquisition cost, and then what that customer's worth to us is their lifetime value.
Yeah.
They're very, very strong at unit economics, like world class. So that means that at a customer level, we've got very strong customer profitability, and we can afford to invest in continuing to grow. Obviously, in the current environment, everyone wants to know when you're going to be profitable and when you're going to start paying dividends and spitting out cash. We've got a line of sight on that. We're not announcing that to the market as far as forecasts at this stage, but the business model has been proven for the last few years, and as we scale, it just gets better actually, which is fantastic.
Does being public also mean that I guess it sort of brings a few different flavors, doesn't it? And I'm really interested in what you've enjoyed and what you've been challenged by and what you've had to learn to become a public company CEO versus a private company one. But is one of the benefits, correct me if I'm wrong, you may spend more time with investors on sort of investor relations, but do you spend less time having to think about how am I going to raise, how am I going to get to the next round and who we're going to raise from, which I imagine is a fast growing tech business, it takes up a hell of a lot of time of the CEO's thoughts. Is that a reality? Is that a benefit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, there's always constant communication. Like, I'd say probably 50% of my time is spent in that investor relations and market facing sort of conversations. A lot of it's around education because what we do is quite technical. What I've learned as I've spoken to a lot of investors and analysts is their perception of marketing is madmen, right? You do long lunches, you go to parties, you flop around, right? As I sort of explain to them like how technical it is and like how it's so important and so complex that you're using data to drive it all, they go on. Most of them say, I never realized marketing was that complicated. So a large part of my job is actually educating the market around what modern marketing is and how complicated it is these days. So then they understand the investment opportunity of investing in a technology company like XPON that's powering that next generation of marketing and customer experience.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of the time goes. And yeah, look, obviously when the markets are good, you can go back and raise capital and, it's not tremendously hard. When the markets are tough, right, like they are right now, I'd hate to be out there trying to raise money. I think you'd be getting touched up pretty badly. But like I said, we're in a good position. We've got plenty of cash in the bank and we don't need to raise cash. So we're just focused on execution and scaling now.
And what have you had to learn? What have you enjoyed? What have you been challenged by? And what have you had to learn to be an effective public company CEO versus the private stuff you've done before?
Yeah, the governance stuff. Like doing an IPO is not something I want to do twice in my career. It's something I'm glad I've done. So I can tick it off and say I've learned a lot and did the process. But there's a lot of compliance and legals and governance stuff, which, when you're a founder and you love customers, you love product, you love selling, spending a lot of time talking to lawyers about what you can and can't say, and it's painful. But that's done. That's a one-off project when you list. Coming out of the back of that, once we've been listed, I think probably the stuff that I've had to adjust the most to is I've got a board, I've got a governance board, I've got 2 non-executive directors. Fantastic mentors for me, both got a lot of experience in public companies and technology companies as well. So they bring that governance layer to the business. And as a founder, when you're used to running fast all of the time, you do have to learn to slow down a little bit to make sure that you've discussed things, thoroughly
Mm,
with your board, and you've understood all the risks and all the
mm,
governance requirements before you make some of the big decisions.
yeah,
So that's probably something I wouldn't say I don't like, but it's something I'm not used to because I've
yeah.
always had the autonomy just to run
You're
fast.
just running. Yeah.
Um, I'm not going to say I love it either because it's probably one of the least favorite things that I do with my time is talk about these topics.
Yeah.
Um, what I've learnt the most is the learning. Learning so much about how public markets work, how sensitive they are to sentiment, how important it is that you choose your words very wisely because you can shift sentiment unintentionally by using the wrong words when you're describing a business. So that's been
Hmm.
really good for me. And I look at it a little bit like enterprise sales because, when you're selling a product to a customer, you're really trying to understand what the needs are of that customer. And I look at investors the same way. What's their investment thesis? What's their funds remit? How do we position our stock as a product that fits into their requirements, that they can confidently invest for the long term? And I think that's something that we've been very lucky with. The lead manager for our IPO was a company called Sequoia Corporate Finance. They did a fantastic job in building our share registry as well. So all of the institutional funds that invested are all long investors. So they're investing for the
Hmm.
long term. They're not short term trading. And none of them have sold stock since we've listed, even with all the current market sort of
Yeah.
upheaval. So that's good because we've got
Right.
long term investors that are
Mm,
backing on the future. They're not backing on the short term, quarter to quarter kind of
that's really
results, which
helpful,
is
isn't it?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I assume that takes a little bit of pressure off, kind of a whole bunch of people jumping up and down looking for dividends in the short term when you've got some
that's
good
right.
long term
Yeah.
people. What about, I guess to attract, you're attracting the attention of both retail and institutionals, but when you're going through that process, of course, people want to look at a company and go, well, they've obviously got a real top talent. Obviously, they're looking at you as as an incredibly key part of that, but also looking at the rest of your team. How did you approach finding your key people, and how much of that was sort of pre IPO versus okay, now we've got money from the IPO and now we're building a stronger executive team. Like how did that play out?
Yeah. So all of our executive team were pre-IPO. Some of them, their
Okay.
last appointment was our CMO, Jennifer. She started, I think, October 2021, so a couple of months just before the IPO. But yeah, I think what we focused on there was obviously the skill sets that we needed. That was first and foremost. But as far as attracting them, it was really about culture, like cultural alignment. Like we're very values driven. We've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years from even that predecessor business to XPON really focused on building culture and values that mean something to people.
Hmm.
And so when we're able to talk really passionately about that and authentically as well about our values and our purpose and really trying to align what our people do in our business to not just how to help the business grow, but how to help them grow as individuals, either personally through personal development or in their career, and how they sort of develop their technical skills or their sales skills or whatever their remits are within the business. So having that real purpose-driven culture has really been very powerful for us because we've attracted the right people, and they've had plenty of options. Like it's a pretty tough job market out there when you're recruiting at the moment. So
Hmm.
what we're finding is there's certain talent that will go for the money, and that's fine. That's where they are, and there's no dramas with that. And there's other talent that money's important. Don't get me wrong, but they also want to have purpose and want to work with a business that's just more than making money. Which
Yeah.
XPON is much more than just making money. So
And it
yeah,
seems like that. I mean, that's certainly been a big trend over the last 3 years, more and more. People have got choices, and especially top talents. They've got a lot of
yeah,
choice. And so, if you don't
absolutely,
have something to bring to the table more than money, then even if they just come for money, always makes me a little bit nervous because you're kind of going, well, how long are they really going to be here for until they get the next best offer, basically? So those that are
yep.
just attracted by money sometimes are harder to retain and contribution from. What about so? What have been some of the key when you think back on what has you know I guess changed the dial on growth in this business? You've obviously grown very quickly, very fast. What are some, from your perspective, what are some of the key ingredients, decisions that you've made, investments that you've made, strategies you put in place that have really unlocked the capacity for you to scale?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different elements to that. Getting your solution market fit right is super important before you drop the hammer on scale. And I think as an entrepreneur, you kind of sometimes have your happy glasses on and you're like, this is working, I want to really scale this, but you haven't been as rigorous as you should have about the data. So back in the early days, it was certainly, I'm not going to say false starts, but we certainly ran fast and went, actually, that's not quite right. Let's just back off a little bit, tweak the model a little bit, now try and run again.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's great because you fail forward, you learn quick, you iterate, you adapt, and then you try again. So that's certainly been the process for us. We haven't certainly got it right 100% of the time first go. I don't think we've ever got it right first go. There's always plenty of learnings and plenty of data that says maybe you should have done this differently. So I think having that sort of mindset in the business, that fail fast, fail forward, there's no mistake. You're not going to fail if you learn something. That's really important. And creating that psychological safety within the team that it's okay to fail as long as you've learned something. And then we use that learning to move forward. That's really important. Distribution.
That word psychological safety, I mean, that term has really emerged only in sort of the last few years. But I guess, from your perspective, that's in the absence of people feeling safe to take risks, you're going to end up in a business that's exceptionally top-down driven. A few people are making all the decisions. There's no, energy or innovation coming from the rest of the team. No one's kind of seeing the problem, coming with a solution because they're all scared of, getting hammered or being shamed or told they're wrong. Is that how the way that you sort of see psychological safety in the culture that you built?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the symptoms of it is blame. Because I think if you're in that environment where you don't feel psychologically safe and you can't, say what's on your mind, or you can't make mistakes and learn from them, then you start blaming others, you start blaming everything but yourself, right? So like you see that manifest itself very, very quickly. Instead of, was one of our core values is own it. So, you own your outcomes no matter what happens. If you've made a decision, you own it, good or bad. And sometimes for their words, right, and they're nice words, but actually living that day to day, you see people on a different kind of spectrum of how they respond to that. And I think as they start to feel safe, then they go, okay, it is okay if I own this. I don't have to try and place blame or shift blame or anything like that. So I think that's one of the symptoms of it is that most definitely.
Sorry, Matt, I interrupted you. You were unpacking some of the key drivers. I just got excited about psychological safety. So back to you.
I'm trying to think where I was at. Oh yeah, distribution. So that was the other thing that's supercharged our growth. So our partnership, particularly with Google, is very, very strong. We get about 30% of our new leads that come directly from the Google sales teams. So we work very closely with the teams at Google. We have the ability to resell Google's technology and bundle it with our own technology as well. So when we go into a customer together, Google has a customer, they've got a problem to solve. We've got technology or we've got capability that we can bundle with Google's technology and our technology together to solve those problems. So that's worked really well for us. And that certainly has given us an unfair advantage as far as getting in the door with lots of companies.
Yeah.
Once we're in the door, it's our job to close the deal and grow the customer. And I think that's probably the other thing that's really catalyzed our growth is very, very focused on customer success. So yes, we've got an excellent sales team that's focused on winning and landing customers, but we've probably got a bigger focus on customer success.
Yeah.
So we do NPS or CSAT every quarter with our customers. I think our NPS currently is 86. So that's very strong.
And for anyone who hasn't heard those terms, that's Net Promoter Score and customer satisfaction.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And so that Net Promoter Score, that's on a scale of kind of 0 to 100. So we're sort of towards the top end of that. Anything over 80 means your customers are advocates and fans, and they'll refer you to their networks as well. So we get referrals from customers. But one of the rules we've put in place with our customer success team is if our customers aren't at least at 80, you cannot sell anything to them. So we really have a very strict rule around.
That's great.
They need to be satisfied and advocates before you try cross-selling and upselling the other things that we offer. And because they are advocates, when we do want to cross-sell and upsell, it's very much from a solution perspective of, well, we're close to the business. We understand your needs. Here's a solution for it. The trust is already there. So it enables us to grow our customers and expand our customers. And that's been really the other core catalyst of growth is we just keep growing our customers and we don't churn them. Like our average monthly retention rate's 99.5%, I think was the last quarter's retention rate. So it's very, very low churn. And the other metric that we look at is a metric called revenue retention. So 100% revenue retention means the customer's stable, they're not growing or shrinking. Anything over 100 means that you're growing those customers. So our rev retention, I think, was 140% from memory from last
Yeah,
quarter.
right.
So we're continuing able to keep growing our customers, but
Mm-hmm.
not in a keep flogging them product, but
Yeah,
we keep strategically partnering with them to solve problems, and
yeah.
we're sort of embedded in their team. So they've been really the things for us
Mm.
that's really catalyzed this fast growth.
I love that, and I love the framework and principle you've put behind, not allowing someone to sell something to a customer who's actually not truly at such a level of engagement that that they're getting value, and therefore new products and solutions make sense for that customer. That's an excellent. I've never heard anyone think about it that way before. I think it's really valuable
Yeah.
to people,
Well, you
regardless of
very
what it
rarely
is.
have to have a conversation on price either, because the
Yeah,
trust is there, the value is there. So it's not a price conversation. So your
yeah,
margins are strong too.
yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. What advice did you receive, or either before this journey with XPON or during the journey with XPON, that had a real impact on you? Advice that kind of stayed in your mind, or that you came back to, or principles that you came back to, either that impacted either the way you developed the business or the way you've chosen to lead the business.
I think when it comes to people, I had a mentor. He was a general manager of a company where I had a job back in the early 2000s, so very early in my career. Um, and he said to me, when it comes to recruiting, he said, if you need to talk yourself into it, talk yourself out of it. And that stuck with me. And I say that to all of our team when they're hiring as well,
Mm,
is if you're sitting there going, oh, yeah, maybe, and you're trying to convince yourself, not the right fit, talk yourself out of it and move on.
mm,
Hard in a very tight labour market to be
yeah,
true to that.
yeah,
But you have to, otherwise you're going to bring people into your business that don't fit your culture, might not
yeah.
have the right skill set, and that's going to impact your customers as well. So that, for
Mm,
me, simple advice, but has stuck with me, and I use it every day still, 20 years later. Um, I listened to a podcast, and I can't remember the name of the CEO. I think he was the CEO of Workday, which is a US
oh, yeah.
based sort of SaaS company. I think it was him. I
Hmm.
can't be 100% sure. And he was saying the number one skill in this modern era to scale a business is having the ability to scale empathy. And I think that really stuck with me as well, because it's quite different, right? And
Mm,
when we think about what empathetic leadership means, it's hard work being an empathetic leader, because you've always got to be putting yourself in other people's shoes. You've always got to be pausing and going, hang on a minute, I'm not going to respond emotionally to this. I need to be empathetic and understand. And then you translate that to a customer and you go, well, how do I develop an empathetic sales team that can always put themselves in the customer's shoes to understand what's going
mm,
on for the customer? So I think
mm,
that was really good advice, and it's something that we're still working on. Like
yeah,
they're easy words to say, but manifesting that, bringing
great.
that to
Yeah,
life takes constant energy and work.
yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely something that's been very, very impactful on me.
I love that. And for those who want to dive a little bit deeper on that topic, I interviewed Stephen M.R. Covey, the son of the famous Stephen Covey, wrote Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And he's really a kind of thought leader on trust and empathy, and how you, to your point, how you scale organizations through, the empathy is what brings trust in the organization. And that's where you get people to flower and take risks and bring their best and feel safe in doing so. You've done a hell of a lot, Matt, in a really short space of time in this business. What's been the most difficult time you've had to face as a CEO, and who did you lean on, or how did you get through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's like everything's good after the fact, right? So you can look back on
Mm,
stuff in hindsight, and it doesn't seem anywhere near as bad. I think we were scaling very, very quickly right from day one. Like it's just been a rocket ship. Um, and in those early days, we hadn't raised a lot of capital. I think the first amount of capital we raised was maybe 1.1 million from memory. And so there was times there where we go, if we can't, you know, optimize the business model so that we're generating more free cash flow, or we can't raise investment, we're going to be in trouble. Thankfully, we did both. That's something we've been
mm,
very focused on, is how do we have a business model that produces cash as we scale, and we're investing heavily, so we're still not quite cash flow positive, but we
yeah,
certainly have got very good cash metrics. Um, and back to the point before around making sure that when you're pitching to investors, you're putting yourself in their shoes and trying to understand what the investment needs they have. That helped us raise capital. But yeah, there was some sleepless nights along the way around, I hope we can pull this off, because we're going to run out of money pretty soon.
Yeah.
We always had a plan B, but you never want to think about plan B because it's not pleasant,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that was one. I think the biggest challenge I've had as the founder and the CEO, is getting the balance right between autonomy for my team, my senior
Mm.
executive team. And like I said, we've brought businesses in that have founders, so they're used to being autonomous as well. And that's part of the secret sauce for XPON is, you've got this founder-led mentality, but trying to get that balance right between giving them too much autonomy and then things happen in silos and they're not consistent, and being able to provide enough sort of structure and influence, I guess, to say, well, these are the things that are non-negotiable as far as how we need to do things at XPON right now.
Mm.
Because you don't get economies of scale if you've got different people and different business units doing different things. And that's simple things, right? Using different CRMs, for example, because you buy a business that's using one, we've used a
Mm.
different one. And, I think they're growing pains for any business that has acquisitions as well, is those systems integration
Yeah.
and that people integration piece.
Mm.
But that has been something that's, I've had to lean on, particularly my board. So our chair, Phil Harris, and our non-exec director, Tim Ebick. They've been really, really good at supporting me there, and just listening. I find that's been really valuable. I think one of the things they do well is they don't tell me what to do. They don't tell me how to suck eggs. They
Mm-hmm.
basically just listen to me. Maybe they get bored sometimes because I talk a lot to them, but yeah, they ask me good questions, and I think that's really the value that you get when you've got a good board around you, is they know the right questions to ask you so that you figure it out for yourself, particularly if you're a founder of a business, rather than maybe a professional CEO that is used to a bit more corporate structure and a bit more sort of direction.
Mm.
Yeah, so they've been some of the challenges, is like scaling that integration and scaling the people side of it. And people's hard, right? There's emotions at play. So yeah, it's never a straight line.
I love that. I love that. And, it sounds like, because I was going to ask you about what, how you've been able to retain your personal, I guess, to make sure that you've been getting what you need out of the journey. Because the reality is, when you're growing a business that fast and you're the founder, you're being pulled from pillar to post. You've got family responsibilities. You're trying to have, find some sort of semblance of balance, and how you show up every day impacts absolutely everybody and everything, which is a lot of, there's a lot of pressure and responsibility. And the moment you go public, you've got even more, more expectations, more everybody looking to you for more stuff. How have you managed to, what practices do you put in place for yourself as a founder to make sure you get what you need energetically, to make sure you can show up and give what you need to everybody else?
Yeah, it's always a juggling act. I don't think there's such a thing as balance. It's more like a pendulum, right? It swings
Mm,
back and forth
yeah.
depending on
Yeah. It's
what's
not like a
going
static
on.
point that you get to, you're like, oh, I've got balance. All right.
Exactly.
Like, I'm
Yeah,
there.
it's not like you're a Buddhist monk, just So yeah, I know. Look, I'm very, very, very lucky because we live in a beautiful part of the world. We live out in the hinterland on the Sunshine Coast, so it's, we've got acreage, we've got animals. My daughter's right into horse riding, so that gives me a very different dynamic to this crazy digital world that I live
Mm,
in, from my work persona into
mhm,
this relaxed sort of open spaces, open air environment. I come up with my best ideas when I'm out with nature. Like, I very rarely consider the computer and come up with good ideas. If I'm
mhm.
out in the paddocks walking around with the animal, all my ideas come to me out there. So I connect with nature. So that's been really good for me. I think that's probably been the number one ingredient that's kept me sane, to be honest. And I think with COVID and with the lockdowns and having to work from home, again, I was really blessed because I was working from this beautiful place. And if I
Mm,
was ever really struggling with something, I'd just get up and walk outside.
yeah.
That's been
Better
good.
way to get
Obviously,
grounded. Mm,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've got the support of my wife. She's fantastic. We've been married for 25 years now, and she's been on this journey with me that whole time
big
in
time.
different ways. So she understands me, manages to call my bullshit when it needs to be called, and supports me really well as well. So I think we've got a good partnership there. So that really helps me as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think just having the right mindsets, and I think there's a few mindsets that I've learned over the years to really focus on. So a gratitude mindset. Part of our stand-ups is the first thing our team need to say in their stand-ups is one thing they're grateful for. So again,
Awesome.
it just keeps reinforcing gratitude in the business as we scale, and you get that
Beautiful.
economies of mindset scale. An abundance mindset. There's a network called Abundance 360, Peter Diamandis.
Hmm.
I've been involved in that for about 5 years. That's been really influential in the way that I think and create this abundance mindset and look at the world as glass half full rather than glass half empty.
Hmm.
So they're probably the two sort of
Mm.
mindset things that have helped me a lot as well.
I love that you brought that to a business because quite often people find it quite difficult. It's like, well, how much of this is about me and my what I like personally, versus what's going to make sense for the company. But I think when people are on the other side of that, and all of a sudden they've got a practice that's personal that's showing up in their workplace. That whole sort of whole of life integration. That's what everybody wants at the moment. They don't want to have this completely separate lives where that creates quite a lot of stress and tension for people. The more they can feel like their whole selves are sort of almost moving in and out of work. It's not it doesn't have this big black and white. Okay, now I'm at work and have to be totally different. Stick my shirt on, like a shirt on today.
Yeah, yeah,
Usually I'm
yeah,
wearing a polo shirt.
yeah,
But only because I was cold. So I had
yeah.
to feel like I had to dress up. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that,
Yeah.
mate.
The
And
other thing it does is it gives you an insight into the whole person. I think
the
that you hit on
humanity
that
of it,
as
yeah,
well. Because you have people and they come in and they'll talk about, and they might talk about, I'm grateful for this team member, they helped me out with this thing, or they'll go, I'm
uh-huh.
grateful for my spouse because they did this, I'm grateful for my kids or my
Mm,
parents or
mm,
whatever. So you start to understand your teammates as a whole person, and that
mm,
really helps bond people bond
yeah.
together, which I find is really valuable.
That's a great. Yeah, I love that practice, and that's
Yeah.
beautiful that you brought that in. We don't have heaps of time left, but I'd love to know a bit about where do you see the business in 3 years? Like, if take ourselves out in the future, what's the business going to look like? What do you think?
Yeah, so I've got to be a little bit careful around what I can and can't say
Yes,
from
of
a
course. Sorry, not
forecasting
the company.
perspective, but
Very
certainly
true.
from where the technology is going.
Yeah.
Like I said, if we go back to the start, our bet on the next version is the metaverse will be a
Mm,
thing, and there's Web3 technologies that underpin that, obviously blockchain and
blockchain.
NFTs and other
Yeah.
parts of it. But I think we're going to live in a world where data is becoming more and more valuable. I have a hypothesis. We might be able to prove it pretty soon that data is going to be more valuable in a recession than not in a recession. And I think as we
Mm,
go in a tougher time, organizations are going to need to rely on their data to make more informed decisions quicker.
yeah.
So the value of that data will increase as the economy potentially goes into a recession. So that as companies rely on their data more and more, I feel we're really well positioned to help them do that, and obviously help us scale as well. And then as this next version of the hardware for the metaverse comes out with the headsets and things like that, we think that that's going to be really the next version of where XPON lands is a data driven experience company for Web3. I think that's probably the most succinct way to explain it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I certainly look forward to watching that evolve. 'Cause such a super interesting space. I'm so glad that you're on the front end of that and really, playing while it's nascent and building your capability there. I ask every founder this question, and it's called above all else. So I want you to now, okay, we've gone out 3 years. I want you to go much further out and go out to the later stages of your business career. Maybe you're getting a bit more towards your sort of yearning years, for want of a better word. You've achieved the stuff that you've wanted business wise. You've tackled the business problems. You've built the businesses that you wanted to, and you're starting to slow down a little bit. And you've got the CEO of the world's largest global community of first time founders, tens of millions of them, all sort of hungry to learn from founders like yourself who succeeded in scaling. And she gives you a once in a lifetime opportunity to share your three above all else's, which is to finish this sentence, three things that you must get right as a founder if you want to scale are what? Like above all else, these are the three things you got to know. What are they for you?
Well, I've hit on one, empathy, and connecting to your people. I think if you don't have that, you're not going to be successful in this modern world. I think people, right? The ability to understand people, to motivate people, to empower people, to bring the best ideas out of people, and to enable them to move really quickly. I think that's certainly going to have to be key moving forward. And I think curiosity, like leaning into curiosity, one of our core values is lead with curiosity. And so being able to lean into that curiosity and just go, well, just because that's how it's always been done, is there a better way? I wonder how that works. I wonder why that does that. So just having that curiosity, I look at, you look at kids like toddlers and just why? So having that
Mm,
toddler mindset almost around continually asking, but why?
mm,
Um, I think they're the things that are going to make people successful. Obviously, networks, connections, capital,
yeah,
technology, they're all table stakes, right?
yeah.
But what's going to differentiate the good from the great, I think, are those sort of softer things. Well,
Mm.
that's my opinion anyway.
That's beautiful, and I think it's a really great, almost challenge for our audience for you to step back and think about, in the last in the last week, how much time have you spent on consciously thinking about how you're building your culture, how you're engaging your people, how you're creating empathy in that environment? I don't mean just spending time on people stuff, because that can be just, quite transactional, but actually, are you really consciously thinking about how to create that environment for your teams? Sometimes we don't spend enough time doing that. And as you said, that's the differentiator in a modern world. You want to attract great talent. You ain't going to do it by just having the best widget. It's just, people aren't interested enough anymore, and they're not all that grateful for the job because they've got options.
Yeah, well, that's right. There's plenty of smart people and there's plenty of great tech out there, right? So that's not a differentiator, either of those things.
No, especially as we go global, right? So it's a big old talent pool out there. Well, Matt, that's all we got time for today. Thank you so much for everything you shared today. It was really, there's a lot of humanity in this conversation. I really enjoyed the warmth that came through in the way that you obviously lead the business, and I really applaud what you've done so far and can't wait to see where you get to over the next several years. I'll be watching closely. How should people, if they want to learn more about XPON, how should they sort of follow along or get involved?
Yeah, no, thanks. So xpon.ai, so that's xpon.ai. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just Matt Forman, all one word on LinkedIn. They're probably the best places.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, mate. Well, folks, before you go, I hope you really enjoyed the show today. Please feel free to jump on the podcast, leave us a review. It really helps it get into the hands of other people. We'd be super grateful if you did that. If you prefer the socials, you can find any of the podcasts on the socials at Scale Ups Podcast on any of your favorite ones. And you've been listening to Scale Ups Podcast. I'm Sean Steele, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalised advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.